Good afternoon, everybody. Mr. King here to go over our article. I'm making this tutorial for you as we read and annotate a new text that also explores whether there should be any restrictions on speech. We were close reading Animal Farm and Totally Free the other day to explore this question of whether there should be restrictions on speech. And now we're going to read a bit more non-fiction text and explore this question. The article's called Why Do People Fall for Fake News? So why do people believe that fake news is really true? This article is from the New York Times. It was published in 2019, last year, written by psychologists Dr. Pennycook and Dr. Rand from MIT and a university in Canada. Okay. And this image is like, imagine that our mind is logical and structured, or we're trying to keep our minds logical and structured, and all of this fake news craziness is trying to infiltrate our nice orderly mind. At least that's what I take away from the image in the article. Anyways, our instructions. We will comment a summary of each paragraph. I have us do this when the text is particularly dense. We will also highlight and define new words. We will also respond to the discussion questions. Our discussion questions involve claim, evidence, and reasoning. We are practicing claim, evidence, and reasoning. Let's go. This shouldn't be here. Bam. Okay, anyways. Let's start. And I numbered the paragraphs for you just to make it easier to stay organized with your annotations. What makes people susceptible to fake news and other forms of strategic misinformation? And what, if anything, can be done about it? Okay. So what makes people... The word susceptible means... if you are susceptible to something, then you are able to be impacted by it. For example, if you are susceptible to the common cold, then you are able to catch the common cold. If you are susceptible to fake news, you are able to be persuaded by fake news. So what makes people able to be persuaded by fake news and other forms of strategic misinformation? What makes people... Okay, and what is strategic misinformation? Well, misinformation is spreading lies, spreading falsehoods. Strategic is when something's done logically or intentionally to accomplish a goal or with a purpose in mind. So for example, when Squealer intentionally misinforms the animals over and over again in Animal Farm, Squealer is using strategic misinformation in order to keep Napoleon in power and keep the animals persuaded and docile, one of our vocab words. And what, if anything, can be done about it? So basically, what can help to make people not susceptible to fake news? These questions have become more urgent in recent years, not least because of revelations about the Russian campaign to influence the 2016 United States presidential election by disseminating propaganda through social media platforms. In general, our political culture seems to be increasingly populated by people who espouse outlandish or demonstrably false claims that often align with their political ideology. What does this mean? Let's break it down, people. So these two questions up here. What makes people fall for fake news and what can we do about it? these questions have become urgent. Time sensitive and important in recent years, not least because of revelations, means discoveries. A revelation is a discovery, right? Not least, it's like something is revealed. Not least because of the discovery about the Russian campaign to influence the 2016 United States presidential election by disseminating means spreading. Spreading around. By spreading around propaganda. Propaganda, propaganda is information or material that is one-sided and biased, and it's misleading, right? Through social media platforms. So this, for context, in 2016, Russia sent out a bunch of propaganda on social media platforms to try to persuade American voters to vote in particular ways. This has happened. It's happening right now too. Like all sorts. Russia's not the only country that does this. All sorts of countries try to influence people to vote in ways that those countries want them to vote. So in general, our political culture seems to be increasingly populated by people who espouse or people who share outlandish or demonstrably false claims that often align with their political ideology. So this is saying our political culture seems to increasingly be full of people who have and who share totally crazy and false claims that align with their political ideology. On all sides of the political spectrum. Paragraph 3. The good news is that psychologists and other social scientists are working hard to understand what prevents people from seeing through propaganda. So psychologists, people who study the brain and thought processes, and social scientists, or people who study societies, are working hard to understand what stops people from, well, basically, they're trying to understand why people fall for propaganda or fake news. The bad news is that there is not yet a consensus on the answer. Consensus means agreement. So there's not yet an agreement on why people fall for fake news. Much of the debate among researchers who are exploring why people fall for fake news, much of the debate among researchers falls into two opposing camps. One group claims that our ability to reason is hijacked by our partisan convictions. That is, we're prone to rationalization. Okay, in other words, like, this group claims that our ability to reason is taken over by our loyalty to the Republican or the Democratic Party. So the idea is that, like, if we already are loyal to the Democratic or Republican Party, that we're just going to rationalize that whatever that party says must be true. We would be prone to rationalization. This is what one group of researchers has found. The other group of researchers, to which the two of us belong, to which the two authors of this article So the two authors of this article claim that the problem is that we often fail to exercise our critical faculties. That is, we're mentally lazy. The authors of this article think that the reason people fall for fake news is that they're just being lazy and they're not using the effort to think critically. It's not that they don't have the ability to think critically and to tell when something's fake. It's just that people are being lazy and not thinking. Well, let's see. However, recent research suggests a silver lining to the dispute. Both camps appear to be capturing an aspect or a part of the problem. So a silver lining means, a solution, or a silver lining is like if there's a problem or a conflict, but there's something good in that problem or something good in that conflict. The silver lining is the beneficial thing in that conflict or problem. So the authors say that both of the groups of researchers up here are capturing part of the problem. Once we understand how much of the problem, and again, the problem is that people are falling for fake news. Once we understand how much of the problem is a result of rationalization and how much is a result of laziness, and as we learn more about which factor plays a role in what types of situations, we'll be better able to design policy solutions that help combat the problem. So, in other words, once we understand why people fall for fake news, we will be able to better solve the problem of people falling for fake news. And again, you should be, like the instructions say, comment summaries of each paragraph. The rationalization camp, and that's the first group of researchers described up here, is the rationalization camp, which has gained considerable prominence in recent years, is built around a set of theories contending, right? A set of theories that say that when it comes to politically charged issues, people use their intellectual abilities to persuade themselves to believe what they want to be true, rather than attempting to actually discover the truth. According to this view, political passions, or our beliefs, essentially make people unreasonable, even, indeed especially, if they tend to be good at reasoning in other contexts. Roughly, the smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing. Whoa. Okay, I want you to understand how crazy this is, guys. So, there is some research that shows that that people who are really good at reasoning and thinking logically tend to fall for fake news because they use their logical reasoning ability to persuade themselves to believe what they want to be true, instead of actually, honestly attempting to discover what's really true. And according to this view, our beliefs, or what we want to be true, essentially can make people unreasonable. Right? So basically, this group of researchers believes that the smarter we are, the better we are at convincing ourselves that whatever we want to be true is true. So where's the evidence for this? Next paragraph. Some of the most striking evidence used to support this position comes from an influential 2012 study, which you can see here if you want, in which the law professor Dan Kahan and his colleagues found that the degree of political polarization on the issue of climate change was greater among people who scored higher on measures of science literacy and numerical ability than it was among those who scored lower on these tests. Okay, political polarization means how extreme people's views are. So basically, people who were more educated had more extreme views, basically. So in other words, more analytical or like more educated Democrats were better able to convince themselves that climate change was a problem. But more analytical and educated Republicans were better able to convince themselves that climate change was not a problem. So in this study, even though like one group of Democrats and one group of Republicans were both analytical and they were both educated, however, instead of both agreeing about whether climate change is a problem, the Democrats simply convinced themselves that climate change is a problem, which aligns with, the platform of the Democratic Party, while the Republicans convinced themselves that climate change was not a problem, which aligns with the platform of the Republican Party, generally speaking. Professor Kahan has found similar results in, for example, studies about gun control in which he experimentally manipulated the partisan slant of information that participants were asked to assess. So in other words, this professor did research to show that basically analytical, intelligent, and educated people oftentimes ignore the truth, and instead of attempting to determine the truth, will use their reasoning ability to try to prove to themselves that their gut assumptions are true or their pre-existing beliefs are true. That's interesting. The implications here are profound. Reasoning can exacerbate or make worse. If you exacerbate something, you make it worse. Reasoning can exacerbate the problem, not provide the solution when it comes to partisan disputes over facts. Further evidence cited in support of this argument comes from a 2010 study by the political scientists Brendan Nyhan and Jason Reifler, who found that appending corrections to misleading claims in news articles can sometimes backfire. Not only did corrections fail to reduce misperceptions, but they also sometimes increased them. It seemed as if people who were ideologically inclined to believe a given falsehood worked so hard to come up with reasons that the correction was wrong that they came to believe the falsehood even more strongly. This is interesting. Basically, this 2010 study found that if you find a misleading claim in a news article and you try to fact check it. So let's say that a fact checker goes on to a news article that has a misleading or a false claim, and the fact checker comments on it to fact check it. Oftentimes, that would only make people more likely to believe the misleading claim. Bizarre. Let's keep reading. But this rationalization account, though compelling or a strong argument, in some contexts does not strike us, the authors, as the most natural or most common explanation of the human weakness for misinformation. We believe that people often just don't think critically enough about the information they encounter. In other words, the authors think that, look, the problem is not that people are incapable of reasoning. The problem is just that people are being lazy and just aren't exerting the effort to think critically enough about what they read online. Let's see why the authors believe this. The authors say a great deal of research in cognitive psychology, or brain science, has shown that a little bit of reasoning goes a long way toward forming accurate beliefs. For example, people who think more analytically, those who are more likely to exercise their analytic skills and not just trust their gut response, are less superstitious, less likely to believe in conspiracy theories, and less receptive to seemingly profound but actually empty assertions like wholeness quiets infinite phenomena. So basically, people who think more analytically instead of just immediately trusting their gut beliefs tend to be less superstitious, are less able to be persuaded by conspiracy theories. Yeah. This body of evidence suggests that the main factor explaining the acceptance of fake news could be cognitive laziness, especially in the context of social media, where news items are often skimmed or merely glanced at. This is interesting. So basically, the authors here say that when people read articles on social media, they skim over them and barely glance at them. And that could be evidence that perhaps people are being lazy as they read what they see on social media and aren't really analyzing whether what they're seeing is true or false or misleading. To test this possibility, the authors recently ran a set of studies in which participants of various political persuasions or various beliefs indicated whether they believed a series of news stories. We showed them real headlines taken from social media, some of which were true and some of which were false. We gauged, or identified, whether our participants would engage in reasoning or go with their gut by having them complete something called the cognitive reflection test, a test widely used in psychology and behavioral economics. It consists of questions with intuitively compelling but incorrect answers, which can be easily shown to be wrong with a modicum of reasoning. For example, if you're running a race and pass the person in second place, what place are you in? If you're not thinking, you might say first place, when of course the answer is second place. So in other words, the researchers asked people this series of questions to see how analytically the people would think. And then after the researchers determined how analytically the people think, they tried to identify if there was, like, if being a more rational and analytical thinker made you less likely to believe fake news stories. What did they find? We found that people who engaged in more reflective reasoning were better at telling true from false, regardless of whether the headlines aligned with their political views. Okay, so good. That means that the authors discovered that their research showed that people who showed stronger reasoning ability and analytical skills were better at discerning true from false. Basically, did not fall for fake news. We controlled for demographic facts such as level of education as well as political leaning. In follow-up studies yet to be published, we have shown that this finding was replicated using a pool of participants that was nationally representative with respect to age, gender, ethnicity, and region of residence, and that it applies not just to the ability to discern true claims from false ones, but also to the ability to identify excessively partisan coverage of true events. What that means is that the researchers did more studies, including people of all different backgrounds in the US, to show that people of all backgrounds for people of all backgrounds, if you are more analytical and you have a stronger logical reasoning ability, you're more likely to be able to tell if something is fake news. So what does the researchers finding, like what should we do with the researchers finding? Let's see. Our results, or what we discovered, strongly suggest that somehow cultivating or promoting our reasoning abilities should be part of the solution to the kinds of partisan misinformation that circulate on social media. And other new research provides evidence that even in highly political contexts, people are not as irrational as the rationalization camp contends. So, in other words, these researchers say, our research shows that people are actually more logical, more reasonable than the earlier studies that we read about at the beginning of this article suggested. Recent studies have shown, for instance, that correcting partisan misperceptions does not backfire most of the time. Contrary to the results of Professors Nyhan and Reifler described above, but instead leads to more accurate beliefs. This is interesting. Earlier we read in the article that a couple researchers did a study that suggested that if we fact check articles, that fact checking articles doesn't do anything to stop people from believing false articles. But apparently more recent studies have shown that actually most of the time correct fact checking articles does work to correct people's perceptions. And let's see. We are not arguing that findings such as Professor Kahan's that support the rationalization theory are unreliable. Our argument is that cases in which our reasoning goes awry, which are surprising and attention-grabbing, seem to be exceptions rather than the rule. Reason is not always, or even typically, held captive by our partisan biases. In many and perhaps most cases, it seems, reason does promote the formation of accurate beliefs. This is not just an academic debate. It has real implications or real effects on public policy. Our research suggests that the solution to politically charged misinformation, in other words, the solution to fake news and misleading news, should involve devoting resources to the spread of accurate information and to training and encouraging people to think more critically. You are not doomed to be unreasonable, even in highly politicized times. Just remember that this is also true of people you disagree with. This is an interesting... So the authors close this by saying, everyone is capable of telling truth from falsehood. We just need the right tools and the right skills. Nobody is just stupid and doomed to be manipulated. Right? We just need to remember that even people we disagree with are not doomed and stupid. Right? We just need the right tools to reason, and then we can all be able to tell truth from falsehood and think for ourselves. Now, I want you to do claim evidence reasoning. Oh yeah, claim evidence reasoning. Your claim in this case: should fake news be banned? I define fake news as something that is objectively false. So, should it be allowed to post online something that is false? For example, should you be allowed to write in an article that, like, the earth is flat? Similarly, should you be allowed to write in an article that President Obama is a lizard who, like, eats babies, right? Like, should it be banned to spread fake news like that, right? And now, whatever your claim is, fake news should or should not be banned. Cite evidence from here somewhere in this article. And then lastly, your reasoning. This quote supports my position that blank because blank. And then we'll discuss it. And then let's CER. Let's do this. Bye.